Hi, it's Matthew Reed here with the fifth installment in our repair series on the three-train 18th century fusee-driven spring clock. And today we are looking at the suspension spring. The suspension spring is the strip of hardened and tempered steel that supports the pendulum and allows it to oscillate. It looks relatively benign, but the suspension spring is really important element of the timekeeping of the clock through primarily length, but also because of restoring force. In this instance, an off-the-peg replacement suspension spring had been fitted, which is fine, but the fit, as we can see here, in the pendulum support part of the backcock was sloppy, and it's likely that this would have a detrimental effect on the operation of the pendulum. So I decided to make a new one to fit this clock. So the first question we ask when it comes to suspension spring is how long is the thing going to be? In this case, we can see that where the crutch or the fork, which is the connecting piece between the clock movement and the pendulum, has interacted with the pendulum rod over many years, there is a small wear mark or a witness. So that gives us one sort of term of reference, and as we'd expect, that witness is about in the middle of this part of the pendulum rod that has been cut away. But there are other witnesses here as well, and in fact the pendulum rod has been changed or changed in length or repaired at some time, so there's a kind of layered history. We see that as well when it comes to the relative position of the pendulum bob on the rod. We see these scratched marks made by multiple repairers over the years. So we can't take any of these values as absolute. All we can do is to try and assess the value of those marks and begin from a new place. I also measure the old spring for what it's worth. To make our spring, I take a piece of hardened and tempered steel strip. In this case it's blued, so it looks quite nice, and I just snap a piece off, and you can see there how brittle the material is, which gives you an indication of how easy it is to break the suspension spring by rough handling. I cut the end square and then just grind it to remove any burrs. Once I've got my strip of steel, I begin work on the top block of the suspension spring, which is made out of brass. It's made from CZ108 brass, which is an unleaded brass, and that means that it's particularly good for cold working, as in bending, for instance, without cracking, which is what we're going to do here. So we begin by forming the top block round, and then by hammering or forging it down onto a piece of suspension spring steel in order to get the kind of U shape that's needed. From that point, we begin filing the whole thing to tidy up the sides and generally get an idea of the overall dimension of the top block. At this point it's still quite a bit too thick, so it wouldn't fit in the pendulum support yet, which is exactly what we want. We next mark the 2 holes where we're going to have our supporting pin for the whole assembly and a brass pin for riveting. I drill and ream those holes round and then mark through onto our suspension spring and punch 2 corresponding holes, again taking advantage of the brittle nature of the steel in the spring, which I then stone with an Arkansas stone to remove any burrs. So the rivet of our spring is going to be formed of hard drawn brass wire, which I file to a slender taper, and then file another temporary pin for the hole that's going to support the pendulum. Using a slightly convex stake, I begin to rivet the assembly together. I file that flat, and then the kind of critical part really, which is getting the top block to be a good fit in the pendulum support, but where it's not able to rock, as we saw before, but not so tight that it can't assume a vertical position when the pendulum hangs in place. Once I've done that, I make a steel pin that's going to support the assembly, tap that into place, and then finish the filing by chamfering the edges. And there we are, we have a new made-to-measure suspension spring unit, and all that remains now is to regulate the clock to bring it to time. So thanks for watching. As always, please remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you again with another installment. Bye for now.